Welcome back to BBVA Stadium. Jon Arnold and Victor Araiza here. It's the Late Show. We're not going to tell that many jokes. We'll tell some, probably, knowing us. But it's a 3-2 victory for the Houston Dynamo in the Texas Derby. That means that cannon is going to be here.
I think it's on its way. They might be hauling it up here.
If it gets here during the show, we will let you know, and maybe it will. So, just 1 second here while we get Victor souped up. Right now, we're going to do the old school pass the mic back and forth. Here we go. We got a substitution already. There's some substitutions made by FC Dallas and by the Houston Dynamo that were interesting. FC Dallas needing to somewhat rescue the game at halftime, down 2-0, and they weren't able to do so. Get the goal from Carlos Darwin Quintero. He celebrated right over here in the stands.
Yeah, right down
what's
here.
Up
right
to his family after that. That was 3-0. FC Dallas does show some fight. They do battle back 3-2, but Victor, too little too late, I think, for FC Dallas, not only to win this game, but also maybe to get into the playoffs. But let's focus on the Dynamo first, the team that you cover. It's a nice win.
Yeah, and there were several storylines. We talked about it coming into the game. We're gonna make another
substitution.
Another substitution. It was the several storylines for both teams. Obviously, for Houston, it was we for all of you who've followed us on the Striker Texas all season, that it hasn't been a good season for Houston. Obviously the big focal point has been that 16-game winless streak throughout the summer, a time where the Houston usually struggles. Now things have turned around in the span of a week, right? A 3-0 win last week over Austin FC, a valiant 1-1 draw against the LA Galaxy, and now they come back home for another rivalry win, 3-2, which was 3-0 for a while there. But over the hated rival FC Dallas, reclaiming the Capitan for the first time since 2017, which was the most recent successful season for Houston. And I think a lot of the conversation after this will be what it's been is, where does it kind of go from here? But I think for the fans that have endured this long season for Houston, I mean, obviously it's a great opportunity to breathe a sigh of relief. If nothing else, you get the wins over your two rivals, and we see here some of these goals. I mean,
that
effort has been big.
This is second goal, an unlucky deflection off of Quignon, but then Griffin Dorsey, who was Mr. Energy, sets up Fafa Pico. Pico now has scored in all 4 of the last Texas Derby matches. He has 3 goals against FC Dallas this year, and he scored 2 in the final Derby match when he was still playing with FC Dallas in 2020. Here's that penalty call. I think Luchi Gonzalez, after the match, felt that this call where Brian Acosta takes down Tim Parker in the box, he said he felt that it was soft. He said he felt it was naive of the ref to call it. And you see FC Dallas players agreed with him in the moment. It took a little while for him
to call it, right?
It does take a while. I think there is contact on Acosta on Parker, but Acosta gets the ball first. Now, that doesn't mean there's no penalty, but I do think, all right, let's see it. We can see it very closely here. I think the follow-through, he does clip him, but one of Luchi Gonzalez's points was, if you're not going to call that tug on Ricardo Pepi in the first half, how are you going to call that if you're kind of letting them play?
Yeah, it was a very physical game.
It was a physical game, and I mean, I think you expect that from a derby. Quintero stepping over the ball. One thing I want to talk about, Victor, after we hopefully watch this celebration. Here he comes. He goes into the stands. We talked about it on the pregame show, Victor, but I think it's worth asking. I saw Matt Doyle of MLSsoccer.com tweet about it. He said it almost has to be frustrating for Houston fans to see Quintero standing out and doing what you thought all season he could do, but didn't do in the first half. I heard you ask Tab Ramos after the match, well, okay, you said he hasn't been fit all year. Would the season have been different if he were?
Yeah, and he didn't quite want to get into it. I mean, it's a moot point, right? I mean, the season's already gone. It's done and dusted. But I do think, we again going back to the pregame show, we talked about it in the podcast too. I mean, I think this has been the expectation. I mean, even I've said it, a half-gas Darwin Quintero is still the most talented player on your roster. Why not go for it? Why not try to see what you can get out of him? And it's almost, it has to be frustrating because there was the proof, and you've seen it now for the past 2 rivalry games, the game against LA that we mentioned. What does it all mean, right? And I did ask Quintero after the game. I mean, What do you take out of it going into 2022? Do you want to stay in Houston? And he did mention, and obviously we'll have more of this on the strikertexas.com. He has an option for next year. He's hoping the team picks up that option. He's hoping to come back in 2022. He says he likes the city of Houston, as he mentioned when he was first signed.
Not sure about that one. No, I'm just kidding. But
we'll see, because he obviously doesn't, at least for this season, have at the beginning of the season didn't seem to fit into the plans of the head coach, or maybe it's the system, or he just wanted him to be a different kind of player. But ultimately, it's what it is at this point.
Talking a little bit about Darwin Quintero's situation, we saw Jader Obrian,
another Colombian
little lovers of coffee, perhaps. If
we are in Hispanic heritage. It was a Hispanic heritage night here at BBVA
the
Stadium.
mariachi was amazing at halftime. I think they should make that a permanent fixture. Really enjoyed that. But of course, Luchi Gonzalez making those halftime adjustments. FC Dallas does push, as we were just showing the highlights of Jader Obrian finding the back of the net twice. FC Dallas putting a little pressure on Houston, making fans nervous, making Tab Ramos nervous, and Obrian, a pretty darn good week for him. He's taking criticism from FC Dallas fans, and I think he has struggled to adapt to the league. But look at this second goal that he finds. It's just a beauty. Smashes it. It's rising the entire time. Finds the roof of the net. I don't know there's anything that Houston can do about that one. And it's just too little too late. If FC Dallas had shown that spirit, if FC Dallas had been able to put together, even the through balls that Obrian is getting in those plays, I think it's a much different game. But a great week for him. And you talk about players who, fans weren't hoping come back next year, or maybe they were thinking, should they be back? Should they not? Obrian suddenly with 4 goals this week, despite 2 of them coming in a losing effort, 2 of them coming in a draw. You say somebody, maybe we keep this guy around, right?
And somebody had to come up with more performances for FC Dallas, right? I mean, it can't just be Pepe all the time.
No, and especially after, I heard one of the guys from Houston, and I think it's fair that he says this because Pepe's become such a star and so much expectation is put on him. But he said, I kind of expected more from Pepe tonight. You can make that case, but at the same time, this is a guy who played 90 minutes in San Pedro Sula, 3 days later played 90 minutes in Frisco against San Jose, played 90 minutes midweek against New York City FC, and just had the responsibility of trying to come back from 2
but he's 18 years old. He can handle it.
There's a lot of
argument that I've heard.
You can keep running if you're 18, but at one point
you can play every day.
At one point you still have to rest. Pepe, I think he pops back up and has more great games in the future, but Jader Obrian giving FC Dallas fans something to think about. One of the things that we talked about before the game, Victor, was Felipe, the FC Dallas goalkeeper, who I said he's the number 2 choice, and he hasn't looked great with Jimmy Maurer injured. We asked Luchi Gonzalez after the game because it was another rough performance. He said Jimmy Maurer had not a setback, but he's just stagnant in his recovery. He was on the bench against New York City, didn't travel for this game. He said, was there a setback? He said it's just stagnant. He's just not getting back to where they need him to be, and we would rather have an 85%, 100% Jimmy than an 85% Jimmy. Fair enough, but, they definitely could have used better goalkeeping tonight, and I think the game has a little bit of a different tint, especially if Fafa Pico doesn't score that first goal, which I think could have been prevented by a goalkeeper sniffing out that cross or doing better in the one-on-one situation.
The Pico service that finds Griffin Dorsey. I mean, we've saw it in the replay. I mean, it's something that sure, his defense could have helped him out too.
You see Pico gets past Justin Shea, puts the ball in. There's an opportunity, I think, to cut the cross off, and then you got to make yourself big there if you're a goalkeeper. That's what they teach you. And maybe,
but I mean, also credit to Griffin Dorsey, right, for the hustle there. And I think a lot of it has been effort, and on all fronts. I mean, you can say this, I think, about players on Dallas's team. You can say this for Houston players as well. I mean, at the end of the day, awful teams, or teams that having seasons like these teams are. A lot of it has to do with not everybody pulling their own weight. And I mean, I think you can say that for FC Dallas. You can certainly say that for Houston. I mean, if everybody on the field play with that hustle that Griffin Dorsey showed, this would be a completely different team. But it's the fact is it's not.
Put this into context for us, Victor. What does it mean to win El Capitan? What does it mean, this derby? What does it mean to still be alive, if I'm not mistaken, mathematically in the Copa Tejas, and potentially even be able to win the thing?
Still be alive.
Not the playoffs, Copa Tejas.
Well, Copa Tejas, it changes everything. I mean, we talked about it heading into this. FC Dallas would have won it tonight. That would have been it. Now they stay in the race. Obviously, Houston still has another game against Austin, which, hey, doesn't look as hard this place to play anymore. as it did when they first visited there. It's obviously in their grasp for the moment. Houston and Dallas are tied at the top. Each of them will have their crack at Austin FC, and that's how they will define the winner. But I think it certainly puts Houston back in the conversation. But first and foremost, I mean, you win back El Capitan. I think we talked about it. I mean, this whole the last couple games have been draws. This series needed a definitive winner, and Houston went out and got it today, and it obviously means for the fans, for both fans. I mean, I think Dallas fans were frustrated with what they saw from their team. Houston fans, I think, I don't know if this necessarily makes up for the season, but it certainly makes it a whole lot better.
What's up with Fafa Pico and scoring in this game? He just loves it.
Well, it doesn't matter what jersey you give him.
It's true. As we mentioned just a little bit before, if you just joined us, Pico has now scored in all three of the meetings between the teams this season, and also in the last meeting in 2020, scored twice for FC Dallas.
No, and he's got a fire under him. I mean, he's talked about it. He talked about it after the last game against the LA Galaxy, where maybe people were making fun of his signing whenever Tab Ramos had mentioned or described him as a DP like player, a DP like acquisition for Houston, and saying, this player is garbage or what have you,
or not DP level, which I think could be fair.
Yeah, and I agree in that sense. I think if that's a conversation, then I think there's a point to be had. And he mentioned those same comments tonight, that he remembers those comments. He's still he's going out there putting up goals to pretty much shut people up, and now he's matched his best MLS season, 10 goals, which he had with the Philadelphia Union in 2018. He has 10 goals now this season. They didn't give him the assist for the first goal, which I think would have matched.
I thought that was harsh. It does take a deflection off Nkosi Safari, but I think that was harsh. To me, that cross is on the way. Yeah, it hits the defender a little bit, but to me, that's an assist. Especially if you're going to give out hockey assists like MLS likes to do. Well, come on, you might as well give the guy an assist.
No, John. The ball magically just rolled into Griffin Dorsey's feet.
You got to give the man some credit. Fafa Pico scoring again in the derby. And I think, like you were mentioning pregame, Victor, the fact that Darwin Quintero is just on the field, and the fact that he's on the field playing well draws the attention of teams and lets Pico get those opportunities. I think for FC Dallas, it's extremely frustrating. The result is frustrating, but also how it happened, because they're down early because of something that Luchi Gonzalez mentioned. And I know before the game and after the game, I heard from people around the team that FC Dallas was working on. They said they don't feel like Houston is a team that's going to build and take a long time and string together 15, 20 passes, 25 passes, tiki-taka, and score a goal. That's not how the Dynamo operate, but they are a team that can hit you on the counter, that when they are off and running, Pico can beat you, Quintero can beat you, and then it's just about stopping that setup. And what happens? They hit on the counter, FC Dallas gets beat by Pico, and they set it up, and it's a goal, and they're down. So I think the fact that FC Dallas had the Dynamo well scouted but weren't able to stop what they did was extremely frustrating for Luchi Gonzalez and his coaching staff.
Yeah, and I think the bigger part of it is the missed opportunity. What was the conversation earlier in the evening when you and I were doing the pregame show? FC Dallas is looking at the playoffs. They're looking at how to get back in. They're looking at how to be the only Texas team to get in the playoffs. And like you wrote, I mean, I think it's not done and dusted, but it certainly doesn't look good. It doesn't bode well the way they're playing, and it can't be good for their confidence either.
Yeah, I think mathematically the team is still technically in the playoff hunt. Tonight, for me, sort of showed that FC Dallas is not a playoff team. And maybe they do sneak in the 7th place, but I think it's quite unlikely. But what we saw on the field tonight, you asked, are they good enough to make the playoffs? Tonight, I think the harsh reality for FC Dallas fans and for the players and the staff is that unless something changes drastically, the answer is no.
Well, that might be what it is for the rest of the season. I think, that's kind of where we're at. And the same thing with Houston. I mean, I think we talked about it. I understand what, because I think it was Pico mentioned it. I mean, they're still going to be in the hunt for the playoffs. Darwin Quintero mentioned it. They're still going to try. And I mean, I think what else are you going to say, right?
You should try.
What else are you going to say? Try. And maybe on the off chance that they're able to get in, I mean, they make a big surprise, and it's going to be a hell of a story to say.
Sure.
But ultimately, I think we're also looking at what these teams can do for 2022, because let's say they do get into the playoffs for whatever reason. Can they really, scare anybody?
Well, I mean, FC Dallas did sneak into the playoffs last year. They get past Portland, and they're right there in the next round. I mean, you can get into the playoffs and anything can happen, but I do think that none of the Texas teams have played in a way that makes you think, ooh, these guys are a sneaky good team. When you look at other teams making that same playoff push right now, LAFC, right? They're currently below the playoff line, although I think they play tomorrow and could get back up. If LAFC makes the playoffs, you don't want to run into them because of their star power, but also because of how they're playing. FC Dallas, Houston, Austin, we don't see that, but it seems unlikely. Let's talk if that story does happen, that scenario that you're just mentioning, we'll have it covered for you on the Striker Texas, and I'm sure people will be quite happy to read it. Before we say goodnight, let's talk a little bit about what comes next. For the Dynamo, tell us about the next match and what do we need to be watching for? We're saying a playoff push, maybe not, but what's next for the Dynamo, and what do you need to see from them in the next game and last 9 games of the season?
Well, they need a win. I mean, that's pretty much the only way to do it. If they seriously want to give themselves even a slimmer of hope, I mean, they can't go into the playoffs without a win on the road. I mean, you need a win on the road, especially with the results they gave here at home. They got Minnesota next. They went there earlier. We had the away coverage. They didn't do so well at all. I mean, they were basically played out of the park. And it was all on mistakes they made on their own. Now with a different confidence, if they can go and at the very least just see what they're made of, right? I mean, because I think the bigger story here is now planning towards 2022. Find out what you're made of in a tough environment because it is in Minnesota. The stadium's against you. Can they get the 3 points and then they can maybe see where they go from there?
It's a long trip next for FC Dallas. They go even farther than Minnesota. They go to Vancouver, got to cross the border with all the challenges that come with that. And coming off of a really disappointing week. I think FC Dallas comes into the week saying we need to get these points, even though it's on the road to be in the playoff push. They come away with 1 point from 2 matches. That's not going to do it. That's not the formula. That's not good enough. And now they've dropped so many points that I really do think it's 3 points or bust in basically every game because you need all 3. One just doesn't do the job. So the Whitecaps, also another team in that group that's surging, a group that sits ahead of FC Dallas on the table and that has games in hand on FCD. I believe they also play tomorrow. So we'll keep updated on the result, and you can check out the standings on the Striker Texas. You can check out the post-match piece that's already up from Victor, already up from myself, with a little more of a Dynamo slant, more of an FC Dallas slant. There's going to be 3 thoughts with an analytical tint from me tomorrow on FC Dallas. Victor's, I believe yours are already published or about to be as we speak. So you can check that all out on the StrikerTexas.com. If you're not already following, wherever the button is, make sure you hit follow. If you're not already subscribed, we'd love if you join us over there. It's a 30-day free trial, and after that, we think you'll stay around because we do take pride in our coverage of Texas soccer. Games like this tonight, interesting games that'll go down in the history of this rivalry. I think we're match 48.
This was 48.
Match 48. You and I have covered a heck of a lot of them, Victor, and right now we've got another one to put in the books. 3-2. The Houston Dynamo win tonight from BBVA Stadium. For Victor Araiza, Jon Arnold signing off, saying good night. We'll talk to you guys soon and see you on the Striker Texas.